My home was flooded during the storm. I went to my son's mansion, soaked and muddy. My daughter-in-law blocked the door. "Ew! You will ruin my white carpets! Go to a shelter!" She slammed the door in my face. I sat on the curb and called the troubled teen I saved from the streets 20 years ago. He is now a general. Suddenly, a military convoy blocked the street. He stepped out and, "I'm glad to have you here." Follow my story until the end, and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. The rain hadn't stopped for 3 days. I sat in my small kitchen on 15 Oak Street, listening to the water hammer against the tin roof like angry fists demanding entry. At 68, I'd weathered many storms, but this one felt different. The meteorologists on the radio kept using words like unprecedented and catastrophic, and for once, they weren't exaggerating. I pulled my threadbare robe tighter around my shoulders and sipped my morning coffee, trying to ignore the brown stain spreading across my ceiling. The leak had started yesterday, but I'd convinced myself it would hold until the storm passed. I'd been wrong about many things lately. The framed photograph on my kitchen table caught my eye. Marcus in his military dress uniform at his promotion ceremony last year. Even at 39, he still had that boyish smile that had melted my heart 20 years ago when he was just a lost 16-year-old with nowhere to go. Next to it sat another frame, Ruben's wedding photo from 11 years ago, his arm around Brixton in her $15,000 dress. The contrast between the two young men I'd raised couldn't have been starker. A sudden crash from the living room made me jump, sending coffee splashing across the table. I rushed to investigate and found my bookshelf toppled over, water pouring through a gaping hole where my window used to be. The storm had finally broken through. Within minutes, muddy water was ankle-deep and rising. I grabbed what I could, my purse, the photo of Marcus, a small overnight bag with a change of clothes. Everything else, 42 years of memories in this little house, would have to fend for itself against the flood. My hands shook as I dialed 911, but the circuits were overloaded. The emergency services recording told me to evacuate immediately and seek higher ground. Higher ground. The only higher ground I knew was 40 minutes away in Maple Ridge, where my son Ruben lived with his wife Brixton in their $600,000 mansion. I hadn't been invited to their home in over 2 years. Not since Brixton made it clear that my presence made her uncomfortable, and that my working-class background didn't align with their social circle. But surely, in an emergency like this, blood would matter more than her pristine white carpets and crystal chandeliers. The drive to Maple Ridge was treacherous. My 15-year-old Honda struggled through flooded streets, windshield wipers fighting a losing battle against the torrential downpour. By the time I reached their gated community, my clothes were soaked from the brief sprints between car and shelter, and mud caked my shoes from wading through deeper puddles than I'd anticipated. 127 Maple Ridge Drive had always intimidated me. The house was a monument to success, modern architecture with floor-to-ceiling windows, manicured lawns that cost more to maintain than I spent on groceries in 6 months, and a 3-car garage that housed Ruben's BMW, Brixton's Mercedes, and her weekend Porsche. I stood on their covered porch, water dripping from my gray hair, my overnight bag clutched against my chest like a shield. The doorbell chimed an elaborate tune that probably cost more than my monthly pension of $850. Through the frosted glass, I could see movement, shapes passing back and forth in what I knew was their marble foyer. The door opened, but not fully. Brixton appeared in the gap, her blonde hair perfectly styled despite the early hour, wearing a cream silk robe that probably cost more than I spent on clothes in a year. Her green eyes widened when she saw me, but not with concern or relief, with horror. "Oh my God," she breathed, her voice carrying that particular tone of disgust usually reserved for finding something unpleasant on the bottom of your shoe. "Denise, what are you doing here?" "My house flooded," I said, trying to keep my voice steady despite the way she was looking at me. "I need somewhere to stay until—" "No." The word came out sharp and final. "Absolutely not. I blinked, certain I'd misheard. Brixton, I just need… Look at you. She gestured at my soaked clothing, my muddy shoes, the way water was still dripping from my hair onto her pristine porch. You're filthy. You'll ruin my white carpets. Do you have any idea how much those cost? $15,000. I can take my shoes off, I offered weakly, but she was already shaking her head. It's not just the shoes, Denise. You're completely soaked. You smell like flood water and mold. I just had the house professionally cleaned yesterday. She wrapped her robe tighter around herself, as if my presence might contaminate her by proximity. That's when Reuben appeared behind her. My son, 42 years old, successful in his insurance business, the boy I'd raised alone from the age of 3 after his father died. The child I'd worked double shifts for, sacrificed my dreams for, put through college by cleaning offices at night and serving coffee during the day. Mom? He looked confused, as if finding his mother on his doorstep during a natural disaster was somehow unexpected. What's going on? Your mother wants to come inside, Brixton said, her voice dripping with disdain. She's soaking wet and muddy and wants to drip all over our house. I watched my son's face, waiting for him to tell his wife that of course his mother could come in, that family came before carpets, that there would always be room for me in his home. I waited for him to remember all the nights I'd sat by his bedside when he was sick, all the sacrifices I'd made so he could have better than I did. Instead, he looked at Brixton, then back at me, his expression uncomfortable but resolute. Mom, maybe it would be better if you went to a shelter. The Red Cross has set up at the community center downtown. The words hit me like a physical blow. A shelter. He was suggesting that his 68-year-old mother, who had raised him alone and given him everything, should go to a homeless shelter rather than mess up his wife's expensive floors. Reuben, I whispered, my voice breaking. It's just until the water recedes, a few days at most. Brixton stepped closer to him, her hand possessively on his arm. Honey, we have the Hendersons coming for dinner tomorrow night. You know how important that contract is for your business. We can't have this disrupting our plans. This, she called me this, like I was some stray animal that had wandered onto their property. I'm sorry, Mom, Reuben said, not meeting my eyes. Brixton's right. We have obligations. Obligations. Not to me, apparently. Not to the woman who had given up her chance at happiness to ensure he had everything he needed. Not to the mother who had worked her fingers to the bone so he could afford college, so he could marry a woman like Brixton, so he could live in a house like this. Please, I tried one more time, hating how desperate I sounded. I don't have anywhere else to go. There's the Red Cross shelter, Brixton repeated, already starting to close the door. They'll take care of you. That's what they're there for. Or maybe you could call that boy you used to help, Reuben added, as if struck by sudden inspiration. What was his name? Marcus. Doesn't he live around here somewhere? The boy I used to help. As if Marcus had been some casual charity case instead of the son of my heart. The young man who still called me every week, who still sent me flowers on Mother's Day, who had never forgotten what I'd done for him. You can't just leave me out here, I said. But the door was already closing. Good luck, Denise, Brixton called through the narrowing gap. I hope you find somewhere appropriate. The door closed with a soft click that sounded like thunder in my ears. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the brass nameplate that read The Holbrooks, water dripping from my hair onto the expensive slate tiles beneath my feet. Slowly, I turned and walked back to my car, each step heavier than the last. The rain had intensified, if that was possible, and by the time I reached my Honda, I was shivering uncontrollably. I sat in the driver's seat, engine running for warmth, and stared back at the house where my son lived. Through the large front window, I could see them moving around inside, Reuben already back to his normal routine, Brixton probably checking her precious carpets for any sign of contamination from my brief presence on their porch. Neither of them looked outside to see if I'd driven away safely. Neither of them cared. I pulled out my phone with trembling fingers. There was one number I could call. One person who had never failed me, never turned me away, never made me feel like a burden. The boy who wasn't my blood, but had become my son in every way that mattered. Marcus answered on the second ring, his voice warm and concerned. "Mom, is everything okay? I've been worried about the flooding in your area." Mom. He called me Mom, something my biological son rarely did anymore. "Marcus," I said, and then I couldn't say anything else. The words stuck in my throat like broken glass. "Where are you?" His voice sharpened with alarm. "Are you safe? Is your house okay?" "No," I whispered. "Nothing's okay." I didn't tell him about Reuben and Brixton. I couldn't bear to voice their cruelty, to make it real by speaking it aloud. I just gave him the address where I was parked and asked if he could help me find somewhere to stay. "Stay right there," he said, and I could hear movement in the background, the sound of him mobilizing. "Don't move, I'm coming to get you." As I waited in my car, rain hammering the roof like an angry percussion section, I thought about the two sons I'd raised. One had turned his back on me for the sake of white carpets and social obligations. The other was rushing through a dangerous storm to save me. Blood, I realized, didn't make family. Love did. And I was about to be reminded of the difference between the two. Sitting in my flooded car on Maple Ridge Drive, waiting for Marcus to arrive, the memories came flooding back faster than the storm water that had destroyed my home. 24 years of sacrifice, 24 years of loving a son who had just shut his door in my face, played out behind my closed eyelids like a movie I couldn't stop watching. I was 30 when David died. A heart attack at 35, sudden and merciless, leaving me with a 3-year-old son and a mountain of medical debt that would follow me for the next decade. I remember standing in our small apartment bathroom, staring at myself in the mirror while Reuben slept in his crib, wondering how I was going to survive. How we were going to survive. The life insurance barely covered the funeral costs. David had always meant to increase the policy, but there had never been enough money, and now there never would be. I had a high school education and no real job experience beyond part-time work while Reuben was a baby. But I had something more important, a fierce determination that my son would never know poverty, never feel the shame of not having what the other kids had. So I did what I had to do. I took a job at the county social services office during the day and cleaned offices at night. While other mothers were tucking their children into bed and reading bedtime stories, I was scrubbing toilets and emptying trash cans, trying to earn enough to keep us afloat. My neighbor, Mrs. Chen, watched Reuben in the evenings for $20 a week, money I could barely spare but had to find. Reuben grew up thinking this was normal. He didn't know that other mothers didn't fall asleep at their kitchen tables over cold cups of coffee at 2 a.m. He didn't know that other families didn't eat cereal for dinner 3 nights a week because mommy was too tired to cook. He just knew that somehow magically there was always food on the table and clean clothes in his drawers and money for school supplies. As he got older, I made sure he had what he needed to fit in. When he wanted to play Little League, I picked up extra cleaning shifts to pay for the equipment. When he needed a suit for his 8th grade graduation, I worked through the flu to earn the money. When he wanted a guitar in high school, I sold my wedding ring, the only valuable thing I had left of David. I told myself it would all be worth it when he grew up. When he became successful and happy and realized how much I had sacrificed for him. When he looked back and understood that every choice I made was for his future. But understanding never came. Instead, Reuben seemed to resent the very sacrifices I made for him. When I missed his football games because I was working, he accused me of not caring. When I fell asleep during one of his school plays, exhausted from pulling a double shift, he was embarrassed. When I couldn't afford to take him on expensive vacations like his friends' families, he acted ashamed of our modest lifestyle. "Why can't you be like Jimmy's mom?" He asked me once when he was 14. "She comes to everything. She volunteers at school. She actually cares about what we do. I wanted to tell him that Jimmy's mom didn't have to work 2 jobs to keep the electricity on. I wanted to explain that I cared so much I was literally working myself into the ground to give him opportunities. But 14-year-old boys don't understand sacrifice. They only understand absence. The breaking point came when Marcus entered our lives. It was 2004, and Ruben was 21, away at college on the partial academic scholarship I'd helped him earn by paying for tutoring and test prep courses. I was working as a social worker by then, finally having earned my degree through night classes that took me 8 years to complete. The pay was better than cleaning offices, but the work was harder in different ways. Marcus Donovan was 16 when he was assigned to my caseload. A ward of the state, he'd been bounced between foster homes since he was 8, each placement ending in failure and disappointment. His file was thick with reports of running away, skipping school, minor theft charges, and what the system politely called behavioral issues. When I first met him in my office, he slouched in the chair across from my desk like a caged animal looking for the nearest exit. His dark hair hung in his eyes, and his clothes were clean but too small, the universal uniform of a kid who'd outgrown what little he had. But it was his eyes that got to me. They held the same wary sadness I'd seen in the mirror 21 years earlier, the look of someone who had learned not to expect much from the world. "So," he said before I could introduce myself, "which group home are you sending me to this time?" "Actually," I said, closing his file and leaning back in my chair, "I was wondering if you'd like to come to dinner." He stared at me like I'd spoken in a foreign language. "What?" "Dinner at my house. Tonight. I make a decent meatloaf, and I have a spare bedroom that's just collecting dust." "Lady, you don't even know me." "I know enough," I said, and somehow I did. I knew what it felt like to be alone and scared. I knew what it meant to have the world turn its back on you when you needed help most. I knew what one person's kindness could mean to someone who had given up hope. That night, Marcus sat at my small kitchen table and ate 3 helpings of meatloaf while I told him about my house rules. Curfew at 10 on school nights, homework done before TV, no drugs or alcohol, and mutual respect always. He nodded along, clearly expecting this arrangement to last maybe a week before something went wrong, and he was back in the system. 3 weeks turned into 3 months. 3 months turned into a year. Slowly, cautiously, Marcus began to trust that this was real. He brought his grades up from failing to honor roll. He started talking about the future, maybe college, maybe the military. He helped with dishes without being asked and learned to do his own laundry. Most importantly, he smiled. Really smiled. Not the bitter, defensive smirk he'd worn like armor when we first met. When Ruben came home for Christmas break that first year, he was furious to find someone else living in our house. "Who is this kid?" he demanded, as if Marcus couldn't hear him from the next room. "Why is he here? Where am I supposed to sleep?" "Marcus is staying in the den for now," I explained. "You can have your old room, of course." "But why is he here at all? This is supposed to be our home." Our home, as if Ruben had contributed anything to the mortgage payments or utility bills. As if he had any say in what I did with the space I worked so hard to maintain. "He's here because he needs somewhere to be," I said simply, "just like you did when you were little." "That's different. I'm your real son." The words hung in the air between us, ugly and hurtful. From the den, I heard the soft sound of a door closing, Marcus giving us privacy for this family argument that he wasn't supposed to be part of. "Marcus is part of our family now," I said firmly. "He's been here almost a year, and he's earned his place." "By doing what?" "He's just some delinquent you picked up out of pity." That's when I lost my temper. 21 years of biting my tongue, of making excuses for Ruben's selfishness, of hoping he would mature into someone kinder than he was showing himself to be, all came pouring out at once. "Marcus helps with grocery shopping," I said, my voice shaking with anger. "He painted the fence this summer without being asked. He noticed when I was getting sick last month and made me soup. He listens when I talk about my day and asks how I'm feeling. When was the last time you did any of those things? Ruben's face flushed red. I don't have time for that stuff. I'm in college. I'm building my future. The future I'm paying for, I reminded him. The future I'm working 60-hour weeks to make possible. Nobody asked you to do that. You're right, I said quietly. Nobody asked. I did it because I love you. Just like I'm helping Marcus because I love him too. Ruben stormed out that night and didn't speak to me for 3 months. When he finally called, it was to tell me he'd met a girl named Brixton and was thinking about proposing. He didn't ask for my blessing or opinion. He was informing me, the way you might tell someone about changing your phone number or moving to a new apartment. Meanwhile, Marcus thrived. He graduated high school with honors and immediately enlisted in the Army. On the day he left for basic training, he hugged me tight and whispered, "Thank you for saving my life, Mom. I promise I'll make you proud." Mom. He called me Mom, and it felt more natural than when Ruben said it. Over the years, as Marcus climbed the ranks and Ruben built his insurance business, the contrast between them became more pronounced. Marcus called every week, sent flowers on Mother's Day, visited whenever he was on leave. He introduced me to his fellow soldiers as his mother, never explaining the complicated circumstances of how we'd become family. To him, I simply was his mother, and he was my son. Ruben, meanwhile, grew more distant with each promotion and pay raise. His visits became perfunctory, obligatory check-ins motivated more by social expectation than genuine affection. When he married Brixton, I could see the calculation in her eyes as she assessed my value to their social aspirations. I came up wanting. The wedding was beautiful. $50,000 of flowers and champagne and designer everything. I wore my best dress, which had cost me $89 at Macy's, and tried to blend into the background of Brixton's wealthy friends and relatives. Marcus, handsome in his dress uniform, was my date. He spent the entire reception making sure I wasn't sitting alone, introducing me to people as his proud mother, making me feel like I belonged. Brixton's mother cornered me by the dessert table and asked, in a voice that could have cut glass, "So you're the one who raised that nice soldier boy? How wonderful that you gave him a chance." As if Marcus had been lucky to have me, instead of the other way around. "Actually," I said, smiling sweetly, "I was the lucky one. He's been the best son a mother could ask for." Her eyebrows lifted in confusion. "But Ruben is your biological son, isn't he?" "Biology doesn't make a family," I replied. "Love does." Now, sitting in my car in the storm, I understood how prophetic those words had been. Ruben had my DNA, but Marcus had my heart. One had taken everything I offered and demanded more. The other had given back tenfold and asked for nothing but love. Through my rain-streaked windshield, I could see Ruben and Brixton moving around inside their warm, dry mansion, probably already forgetting about the wet, inconvenient mother they'd turned away. They had their white carpets and their social obligations and their carefully curated life. I had something better. I had a son who was racing through a dangerous storm to rescue me, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. A son who had never forgotten where he came from or who had helped him get where he was going. The sound of approaching vehicles broke through my reverie. In my rearview mirror, I could see headlights cutting through the rain. Not just one set, but several, moving in formation like a convoy. Marcus wasn't just coming to help me. He was bringing backup. As I watched those lights grow brighter, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, the absolute certainty that someone would move heaven and earth to keep me safe, that I was worth saving, worth protecting, worth loving. Blood had failed me tonight, but family, real family, was about to arrive. The convoy that turned onto Maple Ridge Drive didn't belong in this neighborhood of manicured lawns and million-dollar homes. 3 black SUVs with government plates moved in perfect formation through the storm, their headlights cutting through sheets of rain like searchlights. Behind them came a military transport vehicle that looked more suited to a war zone than a suburban street lined with BMWs and Range Rovers. I watched through my rain-streaked windshield as they pulled up in front of Ruben's house, their engines rumbling like thunder. The lead SUV stopped directly beside my Honda, and I could see a figure in the passenger seat speaking rapidly into a radio. Even through the storm, there was something unmistakably authoritative about the way these vehicles had arranged themselves. Not randomly parked, but strategically positioned. The passenger door of the lead vehicle opened, and Marcus stepped out into the storm. Even at 39, he still moved with the same purposeful stride I remembered from his teenage years. But now there was something else. Command presence, they called it in the military. He wore his dress uniform despite the weather, ribbons and medals catching what light there was, his posture radiating the kind of authority that made people step aside and pay attention. He was at my car door before I could fully process what I was seeing. "Mom," he said as I rolled down my window, rain immediately soaking us both. His voice carried that particular tone of controlled fury that I'd heard him use exactly once before. The day he'd graduated from high school and found out that Ruben had forgotten to come to the ceremony. "Are you hurt? Are you okay?" "I'm fine," I said, though we both knew that was only technically true. "Marcus, what is all this? Why are there so many vehicles?" He glanced back at the convoy, then at Ruben's house, where lights were now blazing in every window. Through the large front windows, I could see figures moving around inside, Ruben and Brixton, both peering out at the commotion in their driveway. "When someone threatens my family," Marcus said quietly, "I respond appropriately." He opened my car door wider, holding an umbrella over me that had materialized from somewhere. "Let's get you out of this storm. Marcus, I don't want to cause trouble." "The trouble has already been caused," he said, and there was steel in his voice that I'd never heard before, by people who should have known better. As I stepped out of my car, I became aware of the other soldiers who had emerged from the vehicles. 6 of them, all in dress uniform despite the weather, all standing at attention in the rain, as if this were some kind of formal ceremony instead of a family emergency. Their presence was both comforting and slightly overwhelming, like having my own personal army. "General Donovan," one of them approached Marcus with crisp military precision. "The perimeter is secure. Should we proceed with the extraction?" Extraction. As if I were a diplomat being rescued from hostile territory instead of an elderly woman seeking shelter from a storm. "Thank you, Colonel Martinez," Marcus replied with the same formal tone. "Escort Mrs. Harrison to the command vehicle. Full honors." Full honors. For me. I felt tears mixing with the rain on my cheeks as Colonel Martinez offered me his arm, with the kind of respect usually reserved for dignitaries and heads of state. As we walked toward the lead SUV, I caught sight of movement in Ruben's house. The front door had opened, and my son was standing in the doorway, his expression a mixture of confusion and growing alarm, as he took in the military convoy that had transformed his quiet street into something resembling a government operation. Brixton appeared beside him, her silk robe replaced by a hastily thrown-on sweater and jeans. Even from a distance, I could see her mouth hanging open as she stared at the uniformed soldiers, the official vehicles, the unmistakable aura of federal authority that had descended on her perfectly ordered world. "Marcus," I said, as Colonel Martinez helped me into the SUV. "They're watching." "Good," he replied, his voice carrying across the space between us and the house. "Let them watch." The interior of the SUV was warm and dry, equipped with communication equipment that looked like something from a spy movie. As I settled into the leather seat, I caught sight of Marcus walking deliberately toward Ruben's front door, his stride measured and purposeful. The other soldiers formed a loose formation behind him, not threatening exactly, but unmistakably present. Through the SUV's bulletproof windows, I watched my biological son and the boy I'd rescued from the streets face each other for the first time in over 3 years. The contrast was stark. Reuben in his expensive casual clothes, soft around the middle from comfortable living, versus Marcus in full military regalia, his bearing radiating the kind of quiet authority that came from years of command responsibility. "Reuben," Marcus said, and even through the glass and rain, his voice carried with parade ground clarity. "We need to talk." My son looked past Marcus to the convoy, to the soldiers, to the undeniable display of power that had materialized in his driveway. "What? What is all this about? Why are there military vehicles in my neighborhood?" "Because your mother needed help," Marcus replied with devastating simplicity. "And when family needs help, you provide it." Brixton stepped forward, and I could see her trying to regain some semblance of control over the situation. "Now listen here. We don't know who you think you are, but you can't just show up at our house with all these people, and—" "I'm General Marcus Donovan, United States Army," Marcus interrupted, his voice cutting through her protest like a blade. "And the woman you turned away in a storm is my mother." The word mother hung in the air like a challenge. I watched Reuben's face cycle through several emotions: surprise, confusion, and what might have been recognition of just how badly he had miscalculated this situation. "Your mother?" Brixton's voice had risen to a pitch that probably disturbed dogs in the next county. "She's not your mother. You're not even related to her. You're just some charity case she took in." The silence that followed was deadly. I could see Marcus's jaw tighten, see the subtle shift in posture that every soldier in the convoy probably recognized as a prelude to engagement. When he spoke again, his voice was quiet, controlled, and absolutely terrifying in its calm. "Ma'am, I'm going to give you one opportunity to reconsider that statement." "It's the truth," Brixton shrieked, apparently too panicked to recognize the warning in his tone. "She's not your real mother. You're nobody. Some street kid she felt sorry for. This whole military parade is ridiculous over some old woman who—" She never got to finish the sentence. Marcus took one step forward, and his voice, when it came, carried the full weight of his rank and authority. "That old woman worked 3 jobs to put me through school. She gave me a home when no one else would. She taught me what honor looks like, what integrity means, what it takes to be a decent human being." His gaze shifted to Reuben, and I saw my biological son actually take a step backward. "She is more of a mother to me than some people deserve, and she is under my protection. Is that clear?" "Now wait just a minute." Reuben finally found his voice, though it shook with something between indignation and fear. "You can't just come to my house and threaten us. I'm her real son. I have rights." "Rights?" Marcus's laugh was harsh and humorless. "What rights? The right to abandon your elderly mother in a natural disaster? The right to prioritize carpets over family? The right to slam doors in the face of the woman who sacrificed everything to raise you?" Each question hit like a physical blow. I watched Reuben's face crumble as the reality of his actions was laid out in stark, undeniable terms. It wasn't like that," Reuben stammered. "We have obligations, social commitments. The house was just cleaned and she was all wet and muddy and—" "Stop talking," Marcus said with quiet authority. "Every word you say makes this worse." Colonel Martinez appeared at Marcus's side, speaking in a voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "General, we've located suitable temporary housing for Mrs. Harrison. The base guest quarters are prepared and waiting." "Outstanding," Marcus replied, without taking his eyes off Reuben. "Please ensure that Mrs. Harrison has everything she needs for an extended stay. Comfort is the priority." "Sir, should we also contact the Media Relations Office? This level of community support operation typically generates local news interest." The suggestion was delivered with military precision, but I caught the underlying meaning. The threat of publicity, of having this story told to the wider community, hung in the air like smoke. Brixton went pale. "Media? You can't. This is a private matter." "Nothing about this is private anymore," Marcus said coolly. When you make a spectacle of rejecting someone's mother in a storm, you don't get to control how that story is told. "Please," Reuben said, and for the first time I heard genuine fear in his voice. "Please, let's not involve the press. We can work this out. Mom can stay with us. We weren't thinking clearly." "No," Marcus said with finality. "You weren't thinking at all. But I am." He gestured toward the SUV where I was sitting. "Mrs. Harrison will be staying where she's wanted and respected, where family actually means something." As he turned to walk back to the convoy, Reuben called out desperately, "Wait! Marcus, please, she's my mother. I made a mistake. I'm sorry." Marcus paused, looking back over his shoulder. "Some mistakes can't be fixed with apologies," he said quietly. "Some lines, once you cross them, change everything." He walked back to the SUV and climbed into the driver's seat, his movements controlled and precise despite the emotional weight of the confrontation. "Are you ready to go home, Mom?" he asked. And the gentleness in his voice was such a contrast to the steel he'd shown moments before that it almost broke my heart. "Home?" I asked, confused. "Base housing," he explained, starting the engine. "It's not much, but it's warm and dry and safe, and nobody there will ever make you feel unwelcome." As we pulled away from Reuben's house, I looked back to see my biological son standing in his doorway, watching us leave. Brixton was nowhere to be seen, probably inside, assessing the damage to her social standing and calculating how to minimize the fallout from this very public display of their cruelty. The convoy moved through the streets with the same precision it had arrived with, and I found myself thinking about the two sons I'd raised. One had wealth and status and a beautiful home, but when tested, had failed spectacularly. The other had built a life of service and honor, and when his family needed him, had moved heaven and earth to provide protection. "Marcus," I said as we drove through the storm toward Fort Harrison, "you didn't have to do all this. The convoy, the soldiers, the official response. I would have been fine with just you." He glanced at me in the rearview mirror, and I saw the boy I'd rescued 20 years ago alongside the man he'd become. "Mom, when someone disrespects you, they disrespect me. When someone abandons you, they abandon everything I believe in. This wasn't just about getting you out of the rain. This was about making sure everyone understands exactly who you are and what you mean." "And who am I?" I asked, genuinely curious about his perspective. "You're the woman who saved my life," he said simply. "You're the mother who taught me that family isn't about blood. It's about choice and commitment and love. You're the person who deserves to be protected and honored and never, ever abandoned." As Fort Harrison came into view through the storm, its lights warm and welcoming in the darkness, I realized that Marcus hadn't just rescued me from the weather. He'd rescued me from the lie I'd been telling myself for years, that blood was thicker than water, that biological family was somehow more real or important than chosen family. Tonight had proven otherwise. Real family was the people who came running when you called. Real family was the people who moved mountains to keep you safe. Real family was driving through a storm with a military convoy because you mattered enough to mobilize for. Fort Harrison at night was a different world from the chaos we'd left behind in Maple Ridge. Clean lines of streetlights marked orderly rows of buildings, each one purposeful and maintained with military precision. Even in the storm, there was something deeply comforting about the sense of order, of people who knew their jobs and did them well. Marcus pulled up to a modest 2-story building with a sign reading, "Guest Quarters, Building 17. The rain had finally begun to ease, but he still came around with an umbrella to escort me inside, the same careful courtesy he'd shown me since he was 16 years old. "Mrs. Harrison," the desk sergeant greeted me with genuine warmth as we entered the lobby. "Welcome to Fort Harrison. General Donovan has made sure we have everything prepared for your stay. If you need anything, and I mean anything, you just let us know." The apartment they'd prepared was simple but clean, with a small kitchen stocked with basics, a comfortable living room, and a bedroom that looked out over the base's central green. More importantly, it was warm and dry and filled with people who treated me with respect. "This is too much," I protested as Marcus showed me around the space. "I don't need all this. A simple hotel room would have been fine." "You're not staying in a hotel," he said firmly. "You're staying where I can make sure you're safe and comfortable, where you're treated like the important person you are." Important. When was the last time anyone had called me important? As we settled in the living room with cups of coffee that someone had thoughtfully prepared, Marcus's phone began buzzing constantly. Text messages, missed calls, voicemails, all ignored as he focused entirely on making sure I was settled. "You should answer that," I said after the 10th buzz. "It might be important." He glanced at the screen and his jaw tightened. "It's Ruben. He's been calling and texting for the past hour." "What does he want?" Marcus scrolled through the messages, his expression growing darker with each one. "He wants to explain himself. He wants me to understand his position. He wants to know if we can work this out like adults." He set the phone aside with obvious disgust. "He wants everything except to take responsibility for what he did." "Maybe I should talk to him," I said, though the words felt heavy in my mouth. "He's still my son, and families fight sometimes." No. The word was final, absolute. "Mom, you need to understand something. What happened tonight wasn't a family fight. It wasn't a misunderstanding or a moment of poor judgment. It was a choice. A deliberate, calculated choice to prioritize material things over human decency." He leaned forward, his voice intense but gentle. "When I got your call, do you know what I was doing? I was in a briefing with my commanding officer about deployment schedules. Important military business. But the moment I heard distress in your voice, nothing else mattered. I left that meeting, mobilized my people, and came to get you. Because that's what you do for family. But you have responsibilities." "My first responsibility is to the people who matter most," he said firmly. "You taught me that. You showed me what real love looks like by putting my needs above your comfort for years. Tonight, I got to return that favor." His phone buzzed again, and this time he answered it with obvious irritation. "What?" Even from across the room, I could hear Ruben's voice, high-pitched with panic and desperation. Marcus listened for maybe 30 seconds before cutting him off. "No, Ruben. We're not doing this. You made your choice when you left our mother sitting in a flooded car in a storm." His voice was cold, professional, the tone of someone used to dealing with difficult situations. "You chose your wife's carpets over your mother's safety. You chose social appearances over human decency. Those choices have consequences." More frantic talking from the other end of the line. Marcus's expression never changed. "I don't care about your explanations," he continued. "I don't care about your excuses. I care about results. And the result is that when your mother needed help, you failed her completely." "Marcus, please." I could hear Ruben's voice clearly now, desperate and pleading. "Let me be very clear about something," Marcus said, his voice dropping to a register that probably made enemy combatants reconsider their life choices. "Mrs. Harrison is under my protection now, permanently. Any further distress caused to her will be considered a personal attack on me and handled accordingly." "What does that mean?" Ruben's voice was shaking now. "It means you had your chance to be her son, and you threw it away. It means she deserves better than someone who sees her as a burden or an embarrassment. It means that as far as I'm concerned, she only has one son now, and it's not you." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. "Marcus," Ruben said finally, his voice barely a whisper, "you can't just take my mother away from me." "I'm not taking her anywhere," Marcus replied with devastating calm. "You threw her away. I'm just making sure someone catches her who knows her true value." He ended the call and immediately blocked the number, his movements quick and decisive. "Was that too harsh?" he asked me. though his expression suggested he already knew the answer. I thought about it carefully, weighing years of disappointment against this one moment of being truly protected and valued. No, I said finally. I don't think it was harsh enough. Over the next few days, as I settled into life on base, the full scope of what Marcus had done began to reveal itself. It wasn't just about providing me with shelter. It was about surrounding me with a community that understood respect and honor and taking care of your own. Colonel Martinez's wife, Elena, stopped by with homemade soup and an invitation to join the Officers' Wives Book Club. Sergeant Major Johnson introduced me to his mother, who was visiting from Montana, and within an hour we were swapping stories and sharing photos like old friends. The base chaplain checked in to make sure I had everything I needed, both practically and spiritually. For the first time in decades, I was part of a real community. People who included me in conversations, who asked for my opinions, who seemed genuinely interested in my thoughts and experiences. It was intoxicating and heartbreaking at the same time. Intoxicating because it felt so good, heartbreaking because it highlighted just how alone I'd been for so long. Marcus checked on me every morning before his duties and every evening afterward. We established a routine of dinner together when his schedule allowed, and slowly I began to understand the man he'd become. Not just his military achievements, though those were impressive enough, but his character. The way he treated subordinates with respect, the way he remembered details about people's families, the way he commanded through example rather than intimidation. I learned that from you, he told me one evening when I commented on his leadership style. You never had to raise your voice to get me to listen. You just lived your values so clearly that I wanted to follow your example. I was just trying to survive, I said, to get you through high school and launched into a decent life. You were modeling integrity, he corrected. Every choice you made taught me something about what kind of person I wanted to be. Every sacrifice showed me what real love looks like. Every time you chose what was right over what was easy, you were raising a son, just not the one you expected. On the fourth day, Brixton showed up at the base gate. I was in the commissary with Elena Martinez, learning about base life and enjoying the simple pleasure of grocery shopping with a friend, when my phone rang. It was the duty officer from the main gate. Mrs. Harrison, we have a civilian here asking to see you. Says her name is Brixton Holbrook. She's persistent. Elena and I exchanged glances. In the few days I'd been on base, I'd shared enough of my story that the entire officer community knew what had happened. The protective instincts of military families had kicked in immediately and completely. Tell her I'm not available, I said. Ma'am, she says she's not leaving until she talks to you. She's been here for 2 hours already. I sighed. Brixton's tenacity was legendary. It's how she'd landed Reuben in the first place. Put her on the phone. A moment later, my daughter-in-law's voice came through the speaker, artificially sweet, but with an underlying edge of desperation. Denise, thank goodness. I've been trying to reach you for days. We need to talk. I don't think we do, I said calmly. This whole situation has gotten out of hand, she continued as if I hadn't spoken. We're family. We should be able to work through a little misunderstanding. A little misunderstanding? I felt my temper beginning to rise. You called me filthy. You said I would ruin your carpets. You suggested I go to a homeless shelter instead of staying in my son's house during a natural disaster. I was stressed, she said, her voice taking on a wheedling quality. The storm, the mess, everything was chaotic. I wasn't thinking clearly. Surely you can understand that. Elena was watching me with the keen interest of someone who'd been briefed on the situation. She made a gesture suggesting I put the call on speaker, which I did. What I understand, I said, is that stress reveals character. When things got difficult, you showed me exactly who you are. That's not fair. Brixton's voice rose to that familiar sharp pitch. You have no idea the pressure I was under. The house was perfect for our dinner party, and suddenly there you were, all wet and muddy and in need of help, I finished. Your husband's mother was in need of help, and your response was to protect your floors. Those floors cost $12,000, she shrieked, apparently forgetting that she was trying to win me over. Elena raised her eyebrows and mouthed, 12,000? With the kind of expression reserved for people who've clearly lost perspective on reality. Brixton, I said, my voice deadly calm, I'm going to explain something to you very clearly. You had one chance to show that you understood what family means. One opportunity to demonstrate basic human decency. You failed spectacularly. But we can fix this, she insisted. Ruben feels terrible. He wants to make it right. We both do. How? I asked. How exactly do you propose to fix the fact that you turned away your husband's elderly mother during a natural disaster? How do you undo the moment when you valued possessions over people? We'll have you over for dinner. A nice dinner, with good china and flowers. We'll make it special. I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. She thought this was about social gestures, about performing the right actions to achieve the desired outcome. I don't want your dinner, Brixton. I don't want your apologies or your explanations or your attempts to manage the situation. I want you to leave me alone. You can't just cut us off. The mask was slipping now, revealing the panic underneath. We're family. You're Ruben's mother. Yes, I said quietly. I am Ruben's mother. And for 42 years, I loved him and supported him and sacrificed for him, believing that someday he'd become the kind of man who would do the same for me. But that's not who he chose to be. He's still your son. Biology doesn't create obligation, I said, and I could hear Marcus's influence in my words. Love does, respect does, decency does, none of which were present in his actions toward me. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. When Brixton spoke again, her voice had changed, becoming colder and more calculating. Fine, she said. If that's how you want to play this, then fine. But don't expect us to keep reaching out forever. Don't expect us to keep trying to fix this when you're being so stubborn and unreasonable. I don't expect anything from you, I said truthfully. I stopped expecting things from you the moment you shut your door in my face. I hung up and looked at Elena, who was shaking her head in amazement. Honey, she said, I've been married to a military officer for 23 years. I've seen some dysfunctional family situations, but that woman... She shook her head again. That woman doesn't understand the first thing about what matters in life. No, I agreed. She doesn't. But I was beginning to understand it perfectly. Family wasn't about blood or obligation or social expectations. It was about people who showed up when you needed them. People who protected and honored and valued you. People who chose to love you not because they had to, but because they wanted to. I had that now. I had it with Marcus, with Elena, with this community of people who'd welcomed me, not because of who I was related to, but because of who I was. For the first time in years, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged. 3 months had passed since the storm that changed everything, and Fort Harrison had become more than just a temporary shelter. It had become home in a way that surprised me every morning when I woke up. The guest quarters had evolved into a comfortable space filled with small touches that made it mine. Photographs on the mantel, books on the shelves, plants by the window that Elena Martinez had helped me choose. I'd established routines that gave structure to my days. Morning coffee with Colonel Martinez and his wife in their kitchen, where we discussed everything from current events to family recipes. Afternoons spent volunteering at the base library, helping soldiers' children with their reading, or working in the community garden that Sergeant Major Johnson had convinced me to help establish. Evenings were often spent with Marcus when his duties allowed, or with the group of officers' wives who had embraced me as one of their own. For the first time in decades, I felt useful, valued, wanted. Mrs. Harrison, young Private Rodriguez said as I helped him with a letter to his girlfriend back in Texas, my mom would love you. She always says that good people recognize other good people, and everyone here talks about how lucky the general is to have you as his mother. I'm the lucky one, I replied, and meant it. Marcus had given me more than shelter and protection. He'd given me a community where I belonged, where my presence added value rather than created obligation. The contrast with my old life couldn't have been starker. No more walking on eggshells around Brixton's moods. No more feeling like an unwelcome guest in my own son's presence. No more pretending that biological connection was enough to sustain a relationship built on resentment and social climbing. My phone rarely rang anymore, and when it did, it was usually Elena asking if I wanted to join her for shopping, or Chaplain Williams inviting me to help with the youth program, or Marcus checking in to see if I needed anything. The desperate calls from Reuben had stopped after the first week, replaced by a silence that spoke volumes about his priorities. But news traveled, especially in a community as interconnected as Maple Ridge's social circle. "You might want to see this," Elena said one afternoon, setting her laptop on my kitchen table with an expression that mixed concern with barely suppressed satisfaction. On the screen was the local newspaper's society page, featuring a photograph from what looked like a charity fundraiser. The headline read, "Local Insurance Executive Faces Business Challenges Amid Family Controversy." The article was carefully worded, the way small-town journalism handled sensitive topics involving prominent families, but the message was clear. Reuben's insurance business was struggling. Several major clients had quietly moved their accounts to competitors. The reasons were never explicitly stated, but the timing was telling. "It seems," Elena said carefully, "that certain influential people in the community have strong feelings about how family members should treat their elders." I scrolled through the article, noting the quotes from unnamed sources expressing disappointment in recent revelations about character and concerns about business relationships with individuals who don't share our community values. "Marcus didn't do this," I said, though it came out more like a question. "Marcus doesn't have to do anything directly," Elena replied. "Word travels fast in military circles, and a lot of the people in Maple Ridge have connections to the base. Contractors, suppliers, reserve officers, military families. When people hear about someone mistreating a Gold Star mother's equivalent, well, consequences follow naturally." Gold Star mother's equivalent. The phrase caught my attention. "What does that mean?" Elena's expression softened. "Honey, you raised a general. You sacrificed everything to help him become the man he is today. In military culture, that makes you almost sacred. What your son and his wife did to you, it's not just personal. It's a violation of everything we hold dear about honoring those who serve and sacrifice." The next piece of news came a week later, delivered by Marcus himself during one of our regular dinners together. "I heard from Colonel Peterson today," he said, carefully cutting his steak. "His wife plays tennis with some of the ladies from Maple Ridge Country Club." I set down my fork, sensing that whatever came next would be significant. "Apparently, Brixton's been having some social difficulties," he continued with the bland tone of someone reporting weather conditions. "Several of her committees have found reasons to replace her. The country club's board decided not to renew her membership chairmanship. Invitations to certain events have decreased." "Because of what happened with me?" "Because of who she revealed herself to be," Marcus corrected gently. "Social circles like theirs survive on reputation and respect. When someone shows that level of cruelty to a family member, especially an elderly one, it raises questions about character that people don't want associated with their organizations." I thought about this, trying to process how I felt about my former daughter-in-law's social exile. Surprisingly, I felt no satisfaction in her downfall, just a tired sort of recognition that actions had consequences. "And Reuben?" I asked. Marcus's jaw tightened slightly. "He's been trying to reach me through official channels. Phone calls to my office, emails to my staff, even an attempt to schedule an appointment through military protocol." "What does he want?" "To apologize, to explain, to ask for my help in repairing his reputation and his business. Marcus looked up from his plate, his expression serious. He seems to think that if I publicly forgive him, if we're seen together, it will restore his social standing. The audacity of it took my breath away. Even now, even after everything, Reuben was thinking about appearances and social management rather than genuine remorse or relationship repair. What did you tell him? Nothing. I haven't responded to any of his communications. Marcus leaned back in his chair, his voice taking on that command tone that made subordinates stand straighter. He had 42 years to learn how to treat you properly. He had countless opportunities to show gratitude for your sacrifices, respect for your dignity, love for your person. He chose not to take them. He's still my biological son, I said quietly, though the words felt hollow even as I spoke them. And you're still the woman who raised him, Marcus replied, which makes his betrayal even worse, not better. Biology doesn't excuse cruelty, Mom. It makes it less forgivable, not more. 2 weeks later, the final piece of the puzzle fell into place when Elena arrived at my door with fresh gossip and homemade cookies. The Holbrook house is for sale, she announced without preamble, setting the cookies on my counter and settling into what had become her usual chair at my kitchen table. What? $1.2 million, according to the listing. Apparently, the financial pressures finally became too much. Reuben's business has lost too many clients, and without Brixton's social connections bringing in referrals, they can't maintain their lifestyle. I absorbed this information slowly. The mansion that had been too good for a wet, muddy mother was now just another piece of real estate, valued in dollars and cents rather than social status. Where will they go? Nobody knows for sure, but there's speculation about moving to Brixton's parents' place in Arizona. Apparently, her father has some business connections there that might help Reuben rebuild. Rebuilding. Starting over in a new place where their reputation hadn't been tarnished by stories of elder abuse and social climbing. It seemed fitting, somehow, that they would have to construct new lives just as I had. That evening, as I sat on the small porch outside my quarters watching the sunset over the base, Marcus joined me with 2 cups of coffee and the comfortable silence that had developed between us over the months. Elena told you about the house, he said eventually. It wasn't a question. Yes. How do you feel about it? I considered the question carefully, examining my emotions like items in a suitcase, making sure I understood what I was carrying. Sad, I said finally. Not for them exactly, but for what we could have been. For the family we might have had if different choices had been made. Regrets? No, I said, surprising myself with the certainty of the answer. No regrets. They showed me who they really were, and I finally listened. You can't regret learning the truth, even when it hurts. And now? I looked around at the base, at the lights coming on in homes where families gathered for dinner, where children did homework while parents discussed their days, where people took care of each other as a matter of course rather than obligation. Now I know what real family looks like, I said. Not perfect, not without challenges, but real. Built on choice and respect and genuine care for each other's well-being. Marcus nodded, understanding in the way that people who'd found their true family always understood each other. The guest quarters arrangement can be permanent if you want, he said quietly. Base housing has approved it, and honestly, having you here has been good for morale. The younger soldiers especially appreciate having someone with your experience and wisdom available. Are you asking me to stay? I'm asking you to consider that this might be where you belong, not as a temporary refugee from a storm, but as a valued member of a community that recognizes your worth. I thought about my old life on 15 Oak Street, the small house that had been more museum than home, filled with photographs of people who had moved on without me. I thought about the loneliness that had characterized most of my days, the careful management required to maintain relationships built on duty rather than affection. Then I thought about the past 3 months. The morning conversations with Elena, the afternoon reading sessions with soldiers' children, the evening dinners with people who included me in their stories, who asked for my opinions, who seemed to genuinely enjoy my company. Yes, I said. I think this is exactly where I belong. As if summoned by my decision, the sound of laughter drifted across the courtyard from where a group of younger officers' wives were setting up for a movie night in the community center. Someone called out my name, inviting me to join them. Marcus smiled, the expression transforming his serious face into something warm and boyish. Better go, Mom. Your family is calling. My family. Not the family I'd been born into or created through marriage, but the family I'd chosen and that had chosen me back. The family that measured worth by character rather than bank accounts, that honored service and sacrifice, that understood the difference between obligation and love. I stood up, brushing off my pants and preparing to join the laughter and fellowship waiting for me across the courtyard. For the first time in decades, I was eager to see what tomorrow would bring, confident that whatever came, I'd face it surrounded by people who truly cared about my well-being. The storm that had destroyed my house and revealed my son's true character had also led me to the place I was meant to be. Sometimes the worst things that happen to us clear the way for the best things we never knew we needed. As I walked toward the community center, toward the sound of women's voices welcoming me into their circle, I realized I was no longer Denise Harrison, the lonely widow who cleaned up other people's messes and accepted scraps of affection from ungrateful relatives. I was mom to a general, friend to a community, and finally, exactly where I belonged. 1 year after the storm that changed my life, I woke up in my permanent home on Fort Harrison, feeling something I hadn't experienced in decades: genuine contentment. The morning sun streamed through my bedroom window, illuminating the collection of photographs that now decorated my dresser. Not just old memories of people who'd moved on, but new ones. Marcus in his dress uniform at his latest promotion ceremony. Elena and me at the base's harvest festival. The reading group I'd started for soldiers' children, all of us grinning over a particularly funny book. These weren't duty photos or obligation snapshots. They were evidence of a life being truly lived, surrounded by people who chose to include me in their joy. I made my morning coffee in the kitchen that had become perfectly organized around my routines, then settled at the small table where I'd begun writing in a journal. Something Elena had suggested during one of our conversations about healing from family trauma. Sometimes, she'd said, you need to write down your own story so you can see clearly how far you've traveled. Today's entry would be different from the others, because today marked exactly 365 days since Reuben and Brixton had slammed their door in my face. Today, I wanted to record not just what had happened, but what it had taught me about the difference between family and relatives, between love and obligation, between settling and thriving. Before I could begin writing, my phone rang. Elena's name appeared on the screen, though it was earlier than our usual check-in time. Good morning, sunshine. Her voice came through warm and slightly mischievous. I have news that you're either going to find very interesting or completely irrelevant, depending on how much you still care about your former life. What kind of news? The kind that proves the universe has a sense of justice. Are you sitting down? I laughed. Elena, I'm 69 years old and drinking coffee in my kitchen. Where else would I be? Fair point. Okay, so you remember how Reuben and Brixton moved to Arizona to live with her parents and start over? Vaguely. It was true. Their departure from Maple Ridge had registered as a distant piece of information, like news about acquaintances rather than family. Well, apparently starting over is more difficult than they expected when your reputation follows you. Brixton's father is a prominent businessman in Scottsdale, very connected to the social scene there. Was connected anyway. I set down my coffee cup, sensing a longer story coming. It turns out, Elena continued, that the story of what they did to you made it to Arizona ahead of them. Military families talk, and Phoenix has a huge veteran population. When word got around about how they treated a Gold Star mother equivalent, let's just say the reception wasn't warm. Elena, I'm not a Gold Star mother. That's for women who've lost sons in service. Honey, you raised a general from nothing. You sacrificed everything so he could serve his country with honor. In the eyes of the military community, you're family. And what your son did to you was an insult to everything we value about supporting those who serve. She paused, and I could hear the satisfaction in her voice as she prepared to deliver the rest of the news. Brixton's father's business partners included several retired military officers. When they heard the story, they made it clear that anyone who would treat their own mother that way wasn't someone they wanted to do business with. One by one, deals fell through. Contracts got canceled. Social invitations dried up. I found myself thinking of Brixton, always so concerned with appearances and social standing, finding herself persona non grata in yet another community. But instead of satisfaction, I felt only a tired recognition that people eventually face the consequences of their choices. There's more, Elena continued. Apparently, the stress of the social and business failures put a strain on their marriage. Brixton filed for divorce last month. The papers cited irreconcilable differences, but according to my sources, she blamed Reuben for their downfall. Said that if he'd been man enough to stand up to his mother instead of letting her ruin their lives, none of this would have happened. The irony was breathtaking. Even in divorce, Brixton was blaming me for consequences that stemmed directly from their own cruelty. She got the house in Arizona, what's left of it after the legal fees, Elena continued. Reuben is apparently working as a claims adjuster for someone else's insurance company now. Middle management? Nothing fancy. Living in a one-bedroom apartment and driving a 10-year-old car. I absorbed this information, waiting to feel something. Vindication, perhaps, or at least some small satisfaction that justice had been served. But all I felt was a profound sense of distance, as if Elena were telling me about strangers rather than people who had once been central to my life. How do you feel about all this? Elena asked, echoing my own internal question. Honestly, I feel nothing. Not happy about their troubles, not sad about their situation, just nothing. They're not part of my life anymore. That's probably the healthiest response, she said approvingly. You've moved on to better things. After I hung up, I sat at my kitchen table for a long time, thinking about the concept of moving on. A year ago, I would have been devastated to learn that my son was struggling, would have felt compelled to reach out and offer help despite how he'd treated me. The old Denise would have made excuses for his behavior and found ways to blame herself for his failures. But the old Denise had been a woman who accepted crumbs of affection and called them love, who confused duty with care, who believed that biological connections created obligations that couldn't be broken no matter how badly she was treated. The new Denise, the woman I'd become in this community that valued and respected me, understood something the old version hadn't. That real love was mutual, that healthy relationships required reciprocity, and that family was something you built through choice and commitment, not something you endured through accident of birth. A knock at my door interrupted my reflections. I opened it to find Marcus standing there in his dress uniform, looking unusually formal for a casual morning visit. "Good morning, Mom," he said, using the title that still made my heart warm every time I heard it. "Do you have a few minutes? There's something I want to show you." "Of course. Come in." I was just having coffee and— "Actually," he interrupted gently, "I was hoping you'd come with me. There's something at my office that I think you'll want to see." Curious, I grabbed my sweater and followed him across the base to the administrative building where his office was located. He led me down hallways lined with photographs of distinguished military leaders, past offices where uniformed personnel worked at the business of keeping our country safe. Marcus's office was spacious, but not ostentatious, decorated with the awards and commendations he'd earned over his 20-year career. Behind his desk hung a large American flag, and on his bookshelf sat a framed photograph of the two of us from his promotion ceremony 6 months earlier. "Sit down," he said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. "I have something to give you." He opened a drawer and pulled out an official-looking document, thick with legal language and bearing several official seals. As he slid it across the desk to me, I could see his hands were slightly unsteady with what might have been nervousness. "What is this?" I asked, though I was already scanning the header that read, "Certificate of Adoption, State of Texas." "It's making things official," Marcus said quietly. "Making legal what's been true in our hearts for 20 years. I'm adopting you as my mother, formally and permanently." I stared at the document, at the careful legal language that would transform our chosen family relationship into something recognized by law and government. Marcus Donovan was officially requesting to adopt Denise Harrison as his legal mother, despite the fact that he was 39 years old and perfectly capable of managing his own affairs. "Marcus," I whispered, my voice breaking, "you don't have to do this. We both know you're my son in every way that matters. A piece of paper won't change that." "You're right," he said, coming around the desk to kneel beside my chair. "It won't change how I feel about you or how you feel about me, but it will change how the world sees us. It will make sure that if anything ever happens to me, you'll be legally recognized as my next of kin. It will give you access to my military benefits, my survivor benefits if needed. Most importantly, it will make a public, official statement that you are my family, chosen and claimed and permanent." Tears were streaming down my face now, 20 years' worth of gratitude and love overflowing at once. "But your biological family—" "What biological family?" he asked with gentle firmness. "The parents who gave me up to the state when I was 8? The relatives who never once asked how I was doing in foster care? You're the only family I've ever had that mattered." I looked down at the document again, at the official seals that would transform our relationship from emotional reality to legal fact. In the space marked "Reason for Adoption," someone had typed, "To formalize the existing family relationship between parties based on 20 years of mutual love, support, and commitment." "The paperwork is already filed," Marcus continued. "The court date is next month. Judge Patterson, who handles military family cases, says it's one of the most heartwarming petitions she's ever seen. An adult child formally claiming his chosen mother. What will this mean practically? It means that legally, officially, permanently, you are my mother and I am your son. It means your last name can become Donovan if you want it to be. It means that when I retire from the military, my benefits will support both of us. It means that no one, not Reuben, not Brixton, not anyone, can ever again question your place in my life or my place in yours." I held the document to my chest, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what he was offering. Not just legal protection or financial security, but something far more valuable. The official recognition that love and choice could create bonds stronger than blood. That family was something you built, rather than something you were born into. "There's one more thing," Marcus said, returning to his desk and opening another drawer. "Something I've been saving for the right moment." He pulled out a small velvet box, the kind that usually held jewelry, and placed it on the desk between us. 20 years ago, you gave me a home when no one else would. You saw potential in a broken, angry kid that everyone else had written off. You loved me through my worst moments and celebrated my best ones. You taught me what it meant to be part of a real family. I opened the box with trembling hands. Inside was a pendant, a simple silver circle engraved with the words, "My son, my choice, my pride," and the date of his high school graduation. "I had this made after I got my first promotion," he said. "I've been carrying it around for years, waiting for the right time to give it to you. Today feels like that time." As he fastened the chain around my neck, I felt the weight of the pendant settle against my chest, right over my heart. It was tangible proof of something I'd known but never fully believed I deserved, that I was loved not out of obligation, but out of choice. "Marcus," I said, my voice steady despite the tears. "I need you to know something. The night of the storm, When Reuben turned me away, I thought my world was ending. I thought I'd failed as a mother, failed as a person, failed at everything that mattered. He waited, giving me space to find the words. But I was wrong. My world wasn't ending. It was beginning. Real life, real family, real love was finally starting. Everything before that night was just preparation for this moment, for this life, for this family we've built together. So you'll sign the adoption papers? I'll sign them, I said, but not because I need legal protection or financial security. I'll sign them because I want the whole world to know what we both already understand, that you are my son, I am your mother, and nothing will ever change that. 6 months later, I stood in Judge Patterson's courtroom wearing my best dress and the pendant Marcus had given me, watching as she made our family official with the stroke of a pen. Elena and Colonel Martinez were there as witnesses, along with several other friends from the base who had become our extended family. "It is my honor," Judge Patterson said, "to grant this petition and officially recognize what has clearly been true for many years, that Marcus Donovan and Denise Harrison Donovan are mother and son, bound by love, choice, and commitment. May your family continue to thrive and serve as an example of what real love looks like." As we walked out of the courthouse, now legally and permanently family, Marcus took my arm and smiled. "So, Mom, how does it feel to be officially a Donovan?" I looked around at the friends who had come to celebrate with us, at the community that had embraced me completely, at the life I'd built from the ashes of my old disappointments. "It feels like coming home," I said. "Finally, after 69 years, I know exactly where I belong." That evening, as we celebrated at a dinner hosted by Elena and Colonel Martinez, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. The message was brief. "Mom, I heard about the adoption. I'm sorry for everything. Can we talk? Reuben." I showed the message to Marcus, who read it without expression. "What do you want to do?" he asked. I looked around the table at the faces of people who had chosen to love me, who had included me in their lives not out of duty, but out of genuine affection. People who had never made me feel like a burden or an obligation, who celebrated my presence rather than tolerating it. I deleted the message without responding. "Nothing," I said. "I want to do absolutely nothing. This is my family now, and this is where my story continues." And for the first time in my life, I felt completely, totally, perfectly at peace. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below. And meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.